Hello fight fans, welcome back to my channel. I am of course Jess, the MMA girl, and you are on my YouTube channel currently because we're going to talk about Dana White and UFC's new announcements for their plans for 2026, debuting their Paramount Plus deal. Of course, this is a $7 billion deal. Don't forget the number. And now we are starting to see the first numbered cards that are being announced for UFC in 2026 with Paramount Plus. Of course, UFC 324 is happening in the month of January. And we also have UFC 325 happening end of January on the 31st. Lots of big names, lots of huge fights, lots of belts changing hands or staying the same. Whatever the case may be, this is huge. And of course, there are a lot of people that are mad about the fights that have been announced. So we're going to go over the new fights for Paramount Plus X UFC. And we're going to see what we think of them because I personally am very excited. I know you guys must be excited too. I think everyone's excited, even though there are some huge fights here that are going to have huge implications and probably answer few questions for us because there are a lot of things that we are quite puzzled about when the fights were announced. But let's get into what UFC 324 is going to be looking like for now. So we spoke about, of course, Waldo Cortes-Acosta quite some time ago about his win over Shamil Aziev at UFC Qatar, of course, 2 weeks after his win against Ante Delaya at UFC's Apex card previously. And of course, he came in on 2 days' notice for UFC Qatar to replace Sergey Spivak. So his turnaround time was insane. He had 5 fights in UFC in 2025, and he was looking for another fight in the month of December for UFC 323. But after saying this, of course, he did a few interviews saying, I've asked the UFC for a fight and they're going to see what they can do for me. He then announced that I think that UFC want me to fight Derek Lewis in December. And that, of course, came to fruition when Dana White and the UFC made their plans and announcements for UFC in 2026 with Paramount Plus for UFC 324, because he'll be taking on, as he said, as expected, Derek Lewis, the Black Beast, Derek Lewis. Of course, that fight for me is great to test Waldo Cortes-Acosta to see how he does against, of course, the gatekeeper, the Black Beast, Derek Lewis. Of course, we've seen previously people like Talison Texera, who was climbing the UFC's heavyweight division until Derek Lewis got in his way and KO'd him in the first. Now, this could happen again for Waldo Cortes-Acosta, who put his 5th place in the UFC rankings, UFC heavyweight rankings, on the line. And again, if he is able to win again, there will be no doubt for me that the UFC will be eyeing him up for a title shot. And if they don't eye him up for a title shot, I don't know what else he needs to do than beating the Black Beast, Derek Lewis, whom I think will be a huge challenge for him as well. The only frustration about this fight that I could see and I could understand was, of course, that Curtis Blaydes, one of UFC's greatest heavyweights currently on the roster, has called out Waldo Cortes-Acosta because Curtis Blaydes considers himself much better than Waldo Cortes-Acosta. But he wanted to prove that in the octagon without talking, of course, too much. And unfortunately, that didn't come to fruition. So don't know why behind the scenes Curtis Blaydes' call out wasn't taken as seriously as we would have liked it, because I would have loved to see Waldo Cortes-Acosta versus Curtis Blaydes, who is a machine at heavyweight. I love Curtis Blaydes, and both guys in the octagon would have been fireworks. But of course, that is not how the UFC planned things. One thing we all have to take into consideration concerning these fights is that Paramount have a lot to say in what happens in the UFC now. And a lot of fans are complaining that this is going to become like the WWE. Now, I don't know if Paramount have said, Waldo Cortes-Acosta versus Derek Lewis, we want to see that fight. We don't want to see him against Curtis Blaydes. But there are quite a few fights on this new UFC 324 card that, of course, aren't up to the expectations of fans and media for MMA alike, because of course we expected other things to happen other than what has been announced. Of course, there are a few things that were announced that were already rumored, so we weren't surprised to see those things happening. However, some of these fights we didn't expect to see, and apparently this is due to the fact that Paramount Plus did not want certain of the fights that UFC proposed to them, including, of course, the main event of UFC 324 being Amanda Nunes versus Kayla Harrison as the main event of this card. That was the proposed fight for UFC 324. But unfortunately, Paramount said, no, thank you. Even though, of course, it is concerning the returning Amanda Nunes, the double champ, whom I have on my desk here. And she's been staring at me for quite some time since I started my podcast, since I started my channel. And finally, she is back in the UFC. I hope that this figurine manifested her return to the UFC in any case. But I'm excited to see her fight, obviously, against Kayla Harrison. Kayla Harrison's a beast, and no one else can slay the beast other than the returning Amanda Nunes, in my eyes. That fight was not accepted by Paramount Plus as the main event for UFC 324. The fight that has been accepted, however, for the main event of UFC 324 is, of course, Justin Gaethje, who is coming back after asking the UFC for a title shot next, saying he would retire if he didn't get a title shot. And now, of course, he gets his title shot because Ilia Topuria is not vacating his belt, but he is letting the UFC put his interim belt on the line whilst he cannot compete, because Ilia Topuria apparently has some major personal issues right now. So he won't be back until the summer of 2026. So this will leave time for the UFC to conjure up a new fight for Ilia Topuria, either against the winner of Gaethje versus Pimblett, which would be, of course, logic because the interim champ needs to face the current champion, or beforehand, maybe putting him against Islam Makhachev at the White House. So is a June card in the White House too early for Ilia Topuria concerning his issues at home? We don't know. So an interim belt is being put on the line. But surprisingly, it's not including Arman Tsarukyan, which is, of course, the huge major frustration that came out of the announcement for Gaethje versus Pimblett. Why is Arman Tsarukyan not in the mix? Because he is the number one contender and he has been for the last year and a half. Now, of course, he just competed at UFC Qatar facing Dan Hooker, getting the sub in the second round, but he needs a bit more rest. Of course, the UFC are trying to use other fighters before putting Arman back in the mix. And of course, having pulled out from his January bout against Islam Makhachev for the UFC lightweight title before Islam moved up to welterweight, the UFC have blatantly made it clear that Arman is in the bad books for now and will not be coming back to compete for a belt for a long time, because of course he needs to get their trust back and gain his place as number one contender, even though he is officially number one contender. So in the meantime, we're going to be seeing Paddy Pimblett all the way from Liverpool competing for his first belt at the UFC. And this is just insanely crazy. I think Paddy Pimblett deserves a title shot. A lot of people think that he doesn't. I think that it's a great idea. And he's a new generation of UFC lightweights that are going to be blowing up the UFC in the next couple of years. And I think that even though they're boosting him from 5th place to a title shot, that's not a big deal. I think it's a great matchup. The highlight Gaethje versus the baddie, Paddy Pimblett, it just makes sense to me. And Gaethje gets what he wants, a title shot. Paddy Pimblett gets what he wants, which is also a title shot. Paddy Pimblett did want initially Ilia Topuria for his title shot, but he will get Ilia Topuria if he defeats Justin Gaethje. And don't forget, the highlight is not to be slept on. So this could be a very interesting bout. It won't be a Michael Chandler versus Paddy Pimblett type fight. I think Justin Gaethje is a much harder guy to beat. Paddy Pimblett has his chances, of course. He will be the favorite in this fight. But this fight is going to be fireworks. And I think that the UFC have chosen a great fight as their interim title fight. But a lot of people, of course, are asking why Arman was not in the mix. But he will be at some point. But I think he's going to have to wait a little bit longer for now. Also on this card, we have Sean O'Malley versus Song Yadong. I feel like this fight has been announced or rumoured to be announced so long ago. Of course, we have the return of Song Yadong, who will be facing the returning Sean O'Malley. Of course, Sean O'Malley we last saw facing Merab Dvalishvili, where he lost via 3rd round submission. And that was way back in June of this year. So he has been on the bench for 6 months. And he will be on the bench for 6 months when he gets back into the octagon in January for UFC 324. But that's not a big deal. We're getting a Sean O'Malley fight, which of course will get him back in the good books with the fans if he beats Song Yadong, who is not an easy opponent either. But very happy to see Sean back on a main card after his loss to Merab. Next up, we have also on the main card of this fight card for now. Of course, this is a rumored lineup. We don't know if this is going to be remaining that way. But for now, we have Jean Silva facing Arnold Allen, who we've not seen in quite some time. Jean Silva, of course, we last saw facing Diego Lopes at UFC Noche, where he lost, of course, via TKO. And he's looking, of course, to get back in that win column. Arnold Allen, of course, looking for a win as well. And I think this will be a really interesting grappling and striking fight. And both guys being very strong on the feet as they are on the ground. I think Arnold Allen is a little bit better even on the ground than Jean Silva. But this fight will be very important for both guys. And I think Jean Silva will give his all. And having lost to Diego Lopes, he knew he had a lot of work to do. So we'll see if Jean Silva in January against Arnold Allen has made the adjustments he needed to make to his game in order to beat someone like Arnold Allen and get back to the win column and show what he's really capable of doing. Otherwise, that would be a potentially very good main card. That was 5 amazing bouts for a main card. Of course, we don't know what order this will be in, but there is also some very interesting prelims that have been announced. We have also Umar Nurmagomedov facing Davison Figueiredo. Of course, this fight is a bantamweight fight. It may be a number one contenders fight. I don't know. I'm a little surprised to see Davison Figueiredo in a fight against Umar, considering his losses recently. But he did just win at UFC Rio, so maybe getting back in that win column gave him the good boost to get to a fight against Umar. This will be a real tough fight for Figueiredo, but I'm very excited to see how these two are going to get it on in the octagon in January. Rose Namajunas is back also. The American girl, Rose Namajunas, Thug Rose, is back, and she'll be taking on Alexa Grasso, who we've not seen in quite some time as well. Both girls, of course, who have been absent from the flyweight division are back, and I cannot wait to see what happens in the octagon. I think early prediction, of course, Rose Namajunas is a very dangerous veteran fighter who has a lot of experience, but I think Alexa Grasso, who needs this win and wants this win in her palmarès on her record, will maybe have the advantage in this fight next year, but we'll see. But it'll be quite interesting. Mexico versus America in this flyweight bout between two women that are very highly regarded in their divisions. So those are the bouts that have been out for UFC 324 for now. Of course, there is room for new fights to be added to this card in the meantime, but this is the fight card we have for now. So main event, Justin Gaethje versus Paddy Pimblett, 4th and 5th ranked lightweights in the UFC, with a co-main of Kayla Harrison, the champion of the UFC women's bantamweight division, taking on the returning Amanda Nunes. Let me know what you think of this card and the main event and the co-main event in the comments down below. Do you believe that Kayla Harrison and Amanda Nunes should have been the main event, and that Justin Gaethje versus Paddy Pimblett should have been a co-main? Do you agree with the UFC and Paramount's decision to put Gaethje versus Pimblett first? Let me know what you think of that. But the bout that has been announced for UFC 325 has also, of course, caused a lot of controversy, because it is, again, a fight no one expected, because this was not what was planned initially and not what should have been planned anyways. But we have Alexander Volkanovski, who is coming back to defend his featherweight title, of course, but he's going to be coming back to defend it against Diego Lopes again. And of course, people are mad because he already got his first title shot against Alexander Volkanovski that he lost via UD. So even Diego Lopes, when he fought Jean Silva and won, in certain interviews said, I think that Lerone Murphy should get the next title shot, which was, of course, for me, the logical conclusion, because, of course, Movsar Evloev is not in the mix. We don't know why, because he's the one who should get the title shot. Khabib Nurmagomedov said it himself. Why is Movsar Evloev not getting the title shot? He is undefeated in his whole MMA career, and he is 9-0 in the UFC. What more can you want? Of course, he is getting the treatment that Arman Tsarukyan is getting, which is you pull out fights, we don't give you the fights you need, and we don't let you advance in your career as much as you could have done, which is such a shame, because Movsar Evloev, he could be champion already, but his track record for cancelling bouts is so bad that, of course, the UFC don't seem to want to trust him anymore, and I completely understand that, but it's his fault now, of course, putting his career in a situation like this, because he now is put on the sidelines so long, even though he's still potentially one of the best featherweights in the UFC, even though we don't see him that often at all. So sad news for Movsar Evloev, but that's just, that's the UFC punishing him for his unpredictability. But for Lerone Murphy, I don't really understand the decision to not put him in this title shot picture, because he was, for me, the potentially biggest opponent, biggest challenge for Alexander Volkanovski at featherweight for the moment, of course. If you include Movsar Evloev in the mix, then he is, of course, the biggest challenge for Alexander Volkanovski to date. We also have Aljamain Sterling in the mix, who may or may not deserve a title shot as well. I think Sterling could do a bit more work in the featherweight division, of course, coming up from bantamweight before he gets a title shot, but he in 2026 should be considered for a title shot also. But Lerone Murphy is definitely being overlooked here. He got the most beautiful spinning back elbow in his fight against Aaron Pico at UFC 319. And since then, of course, the discussion was concluded in every way, shape or form that he deserved the next title shot. No, Lerone Murphy is still not getting the title shot. Lerone Murphy is, for me, the number one contender. He has done his work. He's shown what he's made of. And he's been undefeated in the UFC and in his whole MMA career. But yet he's not getting a title shot. That is just so sad. Maybe after Diego Lopes versus Alexander Volkanovski, we may get Lerone Murphy versus the champion of the featherweight division. But that would be way too late. Even though he may accept it, it would just be late for me in terms of how long he's been waiting to get recognized as one of the biggest title contenders that Alexander Volkanovski or the future champion could face. But in the meantime, we're hearing rumors that Alexander Volkanovski, after his fight against Diego Lopes in January, this may be his last fight. So win or lose, apparently Alexander Volkanovski could be considering retirement after his last title defense or his next title defense. I don't want to see last when I don't know for sure, but that's what we're hearing. The rumors are swirling that he may pull out of the UFC and retire after his next fight. That would be very sad to see, but of course he is nearing the back end of his career. He just had another baby girl with his wife. He of course needs to focus on other things, and he has a lot of great projects which are progressing quite quickly, I would say, because of course Cooking with Volk has become its own channel and his own Instagram page with a lot of followers, and a lot of people who didn't know Alexander Volkanovski from the UFC but just loved seeing a bald-headed Australian man who loves eating show you how to cook and obviously visit people and show you how they cook. It's a great channel and he's doing really well with it, and I think that after he ends his UFC career as a fighter, he could also do a lot of analytic work with the UFC, which he does already on his own channel, where if you go into his channel and you want in-depth breakdowns of previous fights or future fights, Alexander Volkanovski has you covered. So of course the UFC will probably ask him to come in and do some analytic work, as has Dustin Poirier, as has a lot of people like Anthony Smith, and our favorite beloved Daniel Cormier, who is of course a commentator since even before he retired. So these are people that are not only great fighters but have the best fight IQ and the best way of putting it into words. And I think Alexander Volkanovski has a great future in MMA. And not only that, but I think that he could also develop his Cooking with Volk videos and do a lot more videos with fighters, which he does already, but a lot more with fighters, so he can still stay in the UFC atmosphere, if you like. And I think that it would make sense for him to retire in January, but of course it's not nice to see. And Alexander Volkanovski has done it all in the UFC, and he's gone toe to toe with the best of the best. And I think everything that Volkanovski has achieved in his career, despite the minor setbacks with the 2 KOs from Islam and Ilya, who are arguably 2 people that are unbeatable, which is why we need to see that fight. Anyway, Alexander Volkanovski needs his flowers. If it's in January that Alexander Volkanovski will be leaving us, then so be it, and he will walk away with such pride, I hope, and we can all be sat there proud to have seen his career from start to finish and all the achievements that he's already had. Is Diego Lopes the best candidate to send off Alexander Volkanovski? Maybe. I think he's one of the best that could send off someone like Alexander. And maybe that's another element that made the UFC and Paramount choose Diego Lopes over Lerone Murphy, because Lerone Murphy has zero history with Alexander Volkanovski. So sending off Alexander Volkanovski in a fight with Lerone Murphy is less symbolic than him fighting Diego for a second time, of course, having seen them both get in on the octagon a first time this year. This will be great to see again. And of course, if it is the send-off fight, then it's symbolically the last time he'd face Diego Lopes, and Diego Lopes would have been able to say, I've faced Alexander Volkanovski twice. That's great for my palmarès. Even if I win or lose, I was able to compete with the best in Alexander Volkanovski, and he even retired after fighting me. So I think that's probably maybe a factor that was taken into consideration because they have some history. Maybe not. But in any case, what do you guys think of the choice to make Alexander Volkanovski versus Diego Lopes the next title fight at featherweight instead of Lerone Murphy or Movsar Evloev? Let me know what you think in the comments down below. Are you happy with the fights that have been announced? Are you happy that in any case we have some great fights coming up, whether or not it's the best ones to have booked or not? Are you happy with the UFC debut at Paramount Plus? And I cannot wait myself to see what's next for Paramount Plus, of course, because these 2 numbered cards are happening in January, which means when are the fight nights happening? Are we getting a fight night in January? Are we getting 3 cards in January, including 2 numbered cards in the fight night? I'd love to know. But for now, we have to wait and see. Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below, and I'll see you guys in a couple of days for my UFC 323 breakdown and predictions. See you later. Bye.